Welcome to the NHL Wraparound podcast featuring Neil Smith, President General Manager of the 1994 Stanley Cup champion New York Rangers, and longtime ESPN NHL veteran Vic Morren. Together, they share no-nonsense opinions on news and issues around the National Hockey League. Whether you're a casual or diehard fan, each episode of NHL Wraparound will leave you more informed. Now, here's your hosts, Neil and Vic.
Welcome to NHL Wraparound for Wednesday, October 29th, 2025. Vic Morren, Neil Smith, and we will be joined shortly by renowned addiction medicine physician and international speaker, Dr. Lipi Roy, to talk about the ever-increasing problem of gambling and addiction. But first, how did you fare Tuesday with the NHL 16-game slate, all 32 teams in action, wire to wire from 6 o'clock until about 1:30 a.m. Eastern?
Well, I'm going to give a little plug here because I have DAZN and NHL TV. So I was able to watch 4 games at the same time. That wasn't enough because there was, at some points, there were 6 games going, I believe. So it was hard. You had to decide who did you want to see more. And you always seemed to prejudice towards either the place where you grew up or the team that you used to cheer for, or in my case, the team that I used to be the GM for. And you end up going to them more than you do to those teams that you have no relationship to. So it was a great night of hockey, though.
My strategy, and I think at its peak, there were actually 9 games on at the same time. So you try to figure out a strategy, how to watch. And of course, it's easy at 6 o'clock because the games are just starting. And then when you get into that 7:30 to 9:30 window, that was the only time that I actually had ESPN's Frozen Frenzy up to be able to check on other games that I didn't have up. But I had 5 going at the same time. And once that 9th game goes final, then it becomes a piece of cake because you're just doing in reverse what you started with at the beginning of the night at 6 o'clock. So it was an interesting exercise. I made it all the way through the end of Montreal and Seattle, which turned out to be a pretty great game. And we're going to talk about that in a second. And then I saved the third period of Sharks and Kings for this morning. So overall, like you said, it was a great night, but it's something that I don't want to do every week.
No, for sure. In fact, tonight might be a little bit easier night for you.
You only have 1 game to pick. Don't screw it up.
Yes.
Okay.
3-2 last night. 3 wins and 2 losses for Big Deal Neil.
Everybody can check Neil's picks on our website, NHLWraparound.com, where those picks are part of the exclusive content on the website. So now let's get to 3 things you need to pay attention to. Number 1, Monday evening, Sidney Crosby. Goal and 2 assists in a 6-3 win for the Penguins over the St. Louis Blues. And in that game, Crosby becomes just the 9th player in history to reach 1,700 points. 4th fastest behind some pretty good company, Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, and Marcel Dion. After the game against the Flyers on Tuesday, he now has 1,702 points. Jaromir Jagr is second at 1921, and depending on how long Crosby wants to play, I see him in that number 2 slot behind Gretzky, and if he wants to play 4 more years, he could eclipse 2,000 points.
And he very much could play 4 more years. The way he keeps himself in condition, the way he looks after himself, the way he trains, and I think he's got the mental aptitude, too, that he's not wearing down and getting tired of playing hockey. So that very much could happen. But this is a guy that since he came into the league, I have always admired his work ethic and the way he carries himself. He's an ambassador for the league. Do we ever hear anything go on untoward about Sidney Crosby. The worst thing that we ever heard about Sidney Crosby was that he was crying to the refs. Well, who doesn't cry to the refs? And so, I mean, what a remarkable, marvelous career. Never mind the Stanley Cups. Mm-hmm. The fact that Sidney Crosby has been emblematic of what you should try to be as a person, as a hockey player. Just a wonderful, wonderful ambassador.
Couldn't put it any better. And as the years have gone on, that chirping to referees has gotten less and less and less. And also remember that earlier in his career, about 10, 12 years ago, he had some concussion problems, and you don't even hear about that anymore.
And I'll never forget that Brooks Orpik slap shot from the point after Sidney Crosby, I think, won the faceoff, that hit him directly in the teeth and jaw, really hurting him badly, breaking his jaw. This was a game against the Islanders, and it was a very ugly scene. But you know what? You never heard him crying about it. He just went and took some time, got healed up, and came right back.
To give a little bit more scope to how long ago the first of those 1,700 points were, that came in 2005. First point in his first game. Got his first goal in his third game on October 8th. You know where I was that night?
No idea.
I saw his first goal in the delivery room. The night my second boy, Jake, was born, and Jake will be graduating with a psychology degree and a minor in sports coaching next fall. And Sidney Crosby has spanned that entire time.
That's amazing. That really does put it in perspective. That's a great little bit of information there that puts everything in perspective. How long this marvelous career has been.
38 years old. Let's see how long he can go on. But on the other side of the age spectrum, we hit item number 2. The number 1 overall pick in 2023 finally appears to be finding a comfort zone in the Windy City. Connor Bedard, on Tuesday, his first NHL hat trick and an assist, 7-3 win over the Ottawa Senators. Bedard thus far, in 10 games, 6 goals, 6 assists, 12 points, and a +4. This is after a combined plus-minus of -80 in his first 2 seasons. He's an upcoming RFA. The Blackhawks are 5-3-2 through the first 10. They're going to get a good test on an upcoming road trip to Winnipeg, Edmonton, Seattle, and Vancouver. But it finally appears that Bedard is in some happy space.
And you know who deserves a lot of credit for this, even though I haven't been in the locker room and I haven't been at practice, but I can guarantee you that there's been an impact made by Jeff Blashill, the new head coach of the Chicago Blackhawks, somebody that we had on NHL Wraparound, somebody who has been very studious in his career as being a coach and embraced the challenge of the Chicago Blackhawks and their rebuilding and where they were. And while many of us looked on and said, why the hell would you take that job? He's embraced it and did embrace it right from the moment that he went in for the interview. So good on everybody. And I'm hoping that Jeff Blashill has a long career with the Blackhawks and that him and Bedard do great things together.
If success is gauged in terms of 10-game blocks, Blackhawks check the boxes so far.
They sure do. They have improved without any doubt. There are, and we'll get to it later, but there are a number of surprises in the positive way this season.
There certainly are. And as mentioned, I want to see how they fare on this upcoming 4-game road trip. Item number 3, Cole Caulfield sets the Canadian franchise record with his 11th overtime goal. He already has 3 this season. In a 4-3 win Tuesday against the Seattle Kraken, this is a game that the Habs blew a 3-0 lead in the third period. Brandon Montour, 2 goals and an assist in his second game back since his brother's passing. So quite an evening in Seattle.
Yeah, and Cole Caulfield is quite a player, quite a scorer, really an opportunist, and it fits in so well with that young crew that Montreal is grooming. And gosh, he seems like an elder statesman, and he's only been there, I think, 3 years. But he's a diminutive guy, but he can shoot the puck. He's an opportunist. He loves to score, and he's not afraid.
And just a little tip to other coaches around the league. If you get to an overtime game with the Canadiens, you may want to have somebody shadowing this guy.
Tough to shadow 3-on-3, though.
That it is. And that will wrap up 3 things you need to pay attention to. Now we turn to a more serious note as we open our discussion on gambling and addiction. On October 23rd, the NBA was rocked by betting scandals involving Portland Trail Blazers head coach Chauncey Billups, Miami Heat guard Terry Rozier, and former NBA player Damon Jones. They were arrested, and their cases included rigged poker games with connections to organized crime and insider betting schemes, which also led to Toronto Raptors forward Jonte Porter being permanently banned from the NBA. Unfortunately, betting scandals have been around for over a century, going back to the 1919 Black Sox scandal throwing the World Series, Pete Rose, even more recently, Cleveland Guardians pitchers Luis Ortiz and Emmanuel Clase have been on leave since the middle of the summer under suspicion of throwing intentional balls on first pitches of innings. In basketball, we've had the 1951 point shaving scandal by CCNY, NBA referee Tim Donaghy in 2007, betting on games that he officiated. In football, several players have been suspended in recent years for violating the NFL gambling policy. And even in hockey, as recent as 2 years ago, Ottawa Senators forward Shane Pinto was suspended for 41 games for having friends bet for him in the U.S. while he was in Canada, although Pinto claims he did not wager on NHL games. So with that, Neil, I think it just underscores that gambling and addiction has been a problem that continues to fester in society. And you're going to bring in our special guest today, renowned physician, to talk about this very topic.
Yeah, and Vic, you know that this has always bothered me, the fact that the major leagues are all in bed with the casinos, and that it was only a matter of time before young people that play in pro sports were drawn into the gambling part. But knowing much more about this than I ever will know is our guest, and I'm proud to have Dr. Lipi Roy join us from New York, where she lives and works. She is an addiction medicine physician and international speaker. She's national media medical commentator on MSNBC, NBC News, CNN, and News Nation. She's a Forbes contributor. She's the founder of CETA Med, a health speaking company, and the host of the YouTube show Health, Humor, and Harmony, and Health, Hockey, and Leadership. And Dr. Roy, thank you so much for doing this. It's really, Vic and I were both really looking forward to this, because this is a topic that bothers us, along with head concussions and things like that. But gambling addiction is prevalent in society, and you're an expert on this.
Well, Neil, thank you so much for having me on. You know, when we met at the Hockey and Mental Health Gala recently in New York City, I told you right from the get-go, I've been a diehard fan of hockey since I was 9 years old. I was born and raised in Toronto like you were. And, but yeah, in my later years, I studied medicine. I've been so lucky to be a physician and now specializing in addiction medicine. And I can tell you, addiction, like heart disease, can affect absolutely anybody. It's not a moral failing, but certainly in hockey, the sport I love, we're seeing sports betting on the rise in all sports leagues, pro sports leagues, and hockey's not any different. And there's clearly health consequences as a result of gambling. Sports betting is a form of gambling, and yeah, it can be a really serious and problematic issue.
Is the addiction to gambling and aside from the other addictions one could have to drugs, alcohol, on and on and on, but the gambling addiction, which isn't something that is you take something and ingest it. This is something that your brain gets addicted to. Is it the adrenaline that you get from the fact of gambling? What is the actual thing that goes on in the brain without going too deep into it? But what happens in the brain that gets you addicted?
Yeah. So first of all, I'm glad you brought up that B word, the brain. The human brain is the most complex machine known to humankind. That's how I kind of explain it to my patients and the public when I go do speaking, I think when most people think of addiction, they think of drugs, they think of alcohol, cocaine, heroin, and that's true. Those are called substance use disorders or drug alcohol addictions. But there's another type of category of addiction known as behavioral addictions. So those could be like gambling, addiction to gambling, gaming, pornography, work, social media, devices, food. So these are all behaviors, but it still falls under the big umbrella or diagnosis known as addiction. And really, the way I like to explain addiction is that it's any type of substance use or behavior that causes compulsive consumption or use to the effect that it adversely impairs your day-to-day function. So I sometimes joke about, I'm addicted to chocolate, I'm addicted to dessert, but I'm not really addicted because I'm not consuming chocolate cake or tiramisu to the point that I'm unable to go to work, pay my bills, have good friendships and relationships. You know what I'm saying? So addiction is some type of behavior where it's really adversely or harming your day-to-day behaviors and functions. And gambling, I just want to be clear, gambling is something that most U.S. Canadian adults do, and it has no harm because they do it in a way that they enjoy and they move on, right? Similar with even alcohol. Most people who drink a glass of wine or have a beer, they do so and it's not a problem. That's the case with most people. But for a small minority of people with certain risk factors, and we can talk about that, they go on to develop an addiction.
Is it something that could affect the more undeveloped brain? And they say in males that the brain doesn't fully develop until around the age of 25. So is the gambling, which is allowed by 18 and above, is the gambling more harder thing with younger people than with an older brain?
Yes, great question. So let me now just expand a little bit more how the brain is involved. So addiction is really a chronic disease of the brain. So addiction develops when an addictive substance, like say a cocaine, a heroin, alcohol, tobacco, or a behavior, a potentially addictive behavior like gambling, it affects parts of the brain that control decision making, cravings, habits like the basal ganglia, emotions, irritability like the amygdala, which is the primitive part of the brain, and then executive function, which happens in the prefrontal cortex. So it's clearly a problem or a impairment of the brain. So it's a brain disease, and it's a chronic condition. No one's addicted for just one day and it goes away. It's a chronic condition. But the good news is that treatment is available, and we'll talk about that. But to your question, Neil, yes, studies are showing that gambling addiction specifically, it affects more men than it does women, far more. And then with sports betting, we're seeing that trend again in mostly men. There's a lot of research happening right now, but we need far more research in that area. But age is very key. So in addiction world, we advise parents of young children and teenagers, just wait till maybe at least 16 and onwards. before you experiment. Young kids, young teens, preteens, they're experimenting with weed, with a drink, of alcohol. But if you can wait till you're late, a little bit later, the reason is because when you're young, your brain is still developing those neuronal connections. It's a very vulnerable time. So studies are very clear. The younger you start, certainly with substances or even other addictive behaviors like the gambling, the younger you start, the more likely or higher likely it is that you will develop at risk, higher risk, harmful use and develop addiction later in life. And by the way, addiction to gambling is associated with other addictions, including increased rates of substance use, drinking, alcohol, smoking. So,
this Saturday, the NCAA is going to permit athletes to bet on pro sports, despite the fact that they had their own issues. As recently as September 10th, 3 Fresno State basketball players were found to have been conspiring in a gambling scheme. So the NCAA kind of acknowledges that there's a problem, but they're going to allow their athletes to bet on pro sports. And it's almost as if they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth here.
Yeah, I mean, look, the 2024 gambling trends. So look, traditional gambling, we think of like casino gambling, which is growing, internet gambling, which is unlimited, and now sports betting. To your point, Vic, it's exploding. It's now legal in well over 38 states. Look, 20 years ago, if you wanted to legally bet on sports, you'd have to go to like Atlantic City or Las Vegas. Now, you don't even have to get off your sofa. Right? And why? Well, because of mobile technology and legal changes. I think it was a 2018 Supreme Court ruling allowed for like sports betting. And according to the American Gambling Association, about almost $120 billion was legally wagered on sports in 2023. And, I think both you, Neil, and Vic, you're pointing out something that's very obvious now, which is that sports betting is deeply embedded in our culture. Every commercial, broadcast sponsorship, live game sponsorship, social media feeds, pro athletes are promoting and advertising, all these different betting companies. And to now your point, Vic, with the NCAA, these athletes, correct me if I'm wrong, but they're teenagers, right? These are young people. Yeah, maybe their brain is a bit more developed than, say, somebody who's 10 years old, but still, they haven't formed. I mean, you're under so much pressure. It's a very unique, stressful time. It's also a time when there's spikes in certain types of mental illness, like bipolar, schizophrenia. So there's a lot of different things going on. And the fact that they've allowed sports betting, which is gambling, which we know is an addictive behavior, for somebody who's a doctor, an addiction medicine doctor, I find that deeply concerning, Vic.
Well, this fast forwards me to the next question, because if you're going to permit athletes to bet on pro sports while they are in college, and then a percentage of these players are going to become pros, and there's no way that given addiction, they're going to be able to turn this switch off. And this could become even a bigger problem for sports leagues. Do you agree with that?
So, I mean, look, I don't want to, on one hand, I don't want to alarm people, right? So to our earlier point, most adults in the U.S. have gambled without any problem. So I don't want to pathologize an enjoyable activity. But I mean, as I said before, the sports betting is so deeply embedded in our culture. So what are we seeing now? We're basically seeing like 10-year-old kids who are going to, say, Madison Square Gardens or the United Center in Chicago, TD Center in Boston. They're going to these large arenas, and they're seeing massive ads on those centralized, billboards, screens. They're seeing massive ads for DraftKings, FanDuel. So what's more normalized than that for these young children that are going to basketball games and now NCAA games? It's going to be really concerning. So these young kids, and I'm sorry, I'm still going to call an 18-year-old at NCAA, 19, 17, even 20, 21, 22. I mean, it's already being normalized. It's going into their DNA, so to speak, at a pretty young age. And then once they hit the pros, it's just because they're going to see the money, right? And you want to talk another addiction and pressure, right? It's making that money. And it goes back to the brain. Gambling, there's something about gambling that triggers that dopamine release. Just like some of my patients, that first hit of heroin or that first drink, that tobacco, these are addictive substances and behaviors that release dopamine, the pleasure neurotransmitter in the brain. And once you get that hit of that dopamine, your brain wants more and more and more. So again, not to pathologize it, most people who are involved in sports betting, gambling, including my own friends and family, it's not a problem until it becomes one. So that's why I mean, if these pro sports and NCAA, if they're going to introduce and allow this clearly addictive behavior, then they need to have other measures in place to make sure it doesn't become problematic. They need to be able to identify what's at-risk behavior. Do they know the signs and symptoms? Like, let's get ahead of it before it becomes a major problem. And when it does, because it will for some people, do we have the tools in place to make sure people are receiving evidence-based treatment and care?
You were talking before about how easy it is for somebody just to place a bet from their sofa, when in prior years you used to have to go to casino to actually bet. Do you see one of the biggest problems with gambling today? These prop bets where obviously you're seeing fixes. You saw thinking a case in the NBA last year, a player pulled himself out of a game after about 2 minutes of play, saying that he was sick or he was injured, and a bunch of his buddies had bet the under, and of course that was flagged and the bets were nullified. But these prop bets and micro bets, which I mentioned when I opened the segment here with the Cleveland Guardians pitchers, that these appear to be even larger problems because they are singular plays, they are singular events within the course of a game, and they're easy to bet on, and they're also easy to fix.
Yeah, the ease of this is what's really concerning. So let me again make the analogy, because I think more people will be able to relate to substances like drugs and alcohol. There's the supply side, right? Parents get concerned, but the public gets concerned. Elected officials get concerned when there's too much of the drugs in the community. Well, the analogy applies very much with gambling and sports betting, right? When you make something so accessible, and by the way, devices, social media devices, also an addiction. So can you now imagine we're really amplifying addictions, right? Or behaviors that can become potential addictions. People are already addicted to their devices. And now add to that, we're going to use this one addictive tool to attain another potential addictive tool, which is gambling. And you don't have to get up. And can I also then share, we have studies showing that people who have a gambling addiction or who have problematic gambling also have other health problems, including poor diet, heart disease. The American Heart Association did a study where over 3 years, they looked at over 10,000 people aged over 50 who had problematic gambling or straight up gambling disorder. And over 50% of them had arteriosclerosis. In other words, they had plaques in their blood vessels leading to their heart, their arteries. and over 50% developed heart disease. And granted, that's people over 50, but we need to do a lot more of these studies looking at younger people, looking at young men, so, and then that's just the physical problems: bad diet, bad exercise, heart disease, stress, which leads to hypertension and all these other problems. Those are the physical health problems. And then there's the mental health problems. Increased risk. We've known this for a while. People with gambling disorder, gambling addiction, have higher rates of depression, anxiety, and suicidality. A Swedish study showed that people with a gambling addiction have 15 times the rate of suicide as that of compared to the general population. And think about it. I want people paint this picture. When you're gambling, and by the way, people who gamble and have a gambling problem don't talk about it, right? They don't talk to their wives and their sisters and parents about it and their colleagues. They're gambling kind of quietly, silently. And when you've discovered, when things just blow out of proportion, the next thing you know, you've gambled off your grandmother's jewelry, your best suits, your mortgage. And then you have to tell your spouse or your siblings, your parents, that we've lost everything. That profound shame and guilt. You're depressed, you're stressed, you're probably drinking. These things they don't happen in a silo. So can you imagine? So it's not a far leap to then see that you're so depressed that you then also become suicidal. I see this becoming a major problem.
So, Dr. Roy, I've always said that Major League hockey players, because I've dealt only in hockey, and I don't want to. I don't know athletes in baseball, football, or basketball other than by what I see in the media and what I watch. So I'm just going to talk about hockey for a minute. Yeah. I do know that there is a gambling component to their mindset. Never mind sports betting, never mind betting at all. Just meaning they take a gamble. I'm going to gamble that I'll get through here without getting this guy's killing me. I'm going to gamble that I'll, and it goes, when we used to take commercial flights before charters started in the NHL, the players will bet with each other on anything. Like they'll bet on whose luggage comes out first. Whoever's bag came out first won the pot. So each player threw in $10, and if your bag came out first, you got the pot. They would do things like put a dollar bill on a string, and while they're waiting for the plane, and see who the next guy is that tries to pick it up, like a normal passenger, and they'll bet on that with each other, just because they're so competitive with each other. And so I've always said to people that when you look at a hockey player who's been competitive his entire life, from the time he was a little boy to right now, and there's all kinds of trophies in life. There's not just the Stanley Cup. There's also the trophy of the car, the Lamborghini, the biggest, fastest, nicest car, the biggest house, the nicest stereo system, the nicest, and it goes right into relationships too, and it goes into trophy wives, and we've heard that term before. And do you really think that you are this isn't a question to you, I'm just saying it outward. Do you really think this guy is going to stop his competitiveness because you met him and all of a sudden he will stop and there will be no more of him challenging to get the next best whatever? And so isn't it, and I'm saying all this because isn't it just a matter of time with this competitiveness in these guys that they are going to get caught? Some of them, not all of them, not many of them, only but isn't it just a matter of time before this brain wants to go down the gambling road to make money for them or their friends?
Yeah. So, you mentioned the keyword when you were describing, betting on whose luggage is going to come up first. Yeah, that's something I can relate to because the word that I was thinking of immediately, and you brought it up later, is that C word. It's being competitive. It's about competition. And like you, Neil, hockey is the sport I can most relate to because I've been a fan of it, such a diehard fan since I was 9. But this is something I can relate to, even though I'm not a pro athlete. I've played sports since I was a kid, but as a physician, and this is something that I talked about in my speech at that Hockey and Mental Health Gala, Neil, if you remember, I talked about the common traits that doctors and pro athletes, specifically hockey players, have in common. We are type A people. We are competitive. I may not be a pro athlete, but don't think for a second that I'm not your typical type A competitive doctor. And so as a result, that type of mindset has certainly served me well. I have 4 degrees, trained at Duke, taught at Harvard. I've done okay with my life. Same with these pro athletes who are gifted physically and also mentally. They have that. So that competitive kind of attitude, mindset has served them well. The downside, though, is that sometimes, and again, we can talk about what distinguishes those who then develop the problem versus those who don't, but that competitive streak, that sense of accomplishment, that dopamine high, that euphoria that we get, when it's not in check, it can become problematic. So yes, Neil, to your point, yes, of course, these hockey players that are built to be competitive and to win and to get that next award, for the most part, it's that behavior that drives them to achieve and to succeed, for the most part, is a good thing until it's not. And by the way, addiction or addictive behaviors, including substance use, can happen to anybody. To my earlier point, it is not a moral failing or a moral weakness. It can happen to you, Neil, you, Vic, and it can happen to me. Yes, me, Dr. Lipi Roy. My patients have law degrees, PhDs. They are Indian, Chinese, white, Bulgarian. They are from all walks of life. Just like heart disease, lupus, cancer can affect anybody, addiction can affect anybody. And typically what studies show is that it's often some type of trauma, stress that can increase one's risk, grief, loss. These are behaviors, life experiences, that are so common and universal, but under the right circumstances, when it's repeated, when trauma happens at a young age, when there's no support, treatment, medications, therapy, whatever, support to help people, when the trauma is ongoing, genetics, these are all risk factors for why that can predict why some people can develop an addiction and others don't. Again, to be clear, addiction can happen to anyone at any time, but these are studies show that what certain risk factors are that can lead to that behaviors. That's why I think it's so important for hockey players to have that good sense of community, and when they see problematic behaviors either in themselves or in, say, their teammates, their friends, their coaches, their colleagues, they need to talk about it. And that's why I'm glad we are talking about it in this podcast, Neil, because again, to me as a doctor and as a hockey fan, I care deeply about people in general, my patients, my family members, but I care deeply about hockey and hockey players. And so that's why I'm glad we're having this conversation, so we can reduce the stigma that's associated with all types of addiction, including gambling.
I think you've just answered part of what my next question was. So I'm going to switch it a little bit and say, Dr. Roy, is there any chance, do you see any chance that we can get the genie back in the bottle with sports, and with particularly the NHL, because that's what our show is about. It's about hockey. But is there any chance we can get this genie back in the bottle? And you've already given advice as to if you see something, do something. But Is there any chance, I'll say it again, is there any chance we can somehow get the cow back in the barn?
Well, look, I think when it comes to sports betting and pro sports, that ship has sailed. I think because you guys know better than I, as well as I do. It's all the money. The language is money, right? Money talks, and so they're seeing massive profits. Now that said, I'm all about making money and making profits, but I think we need regulation. I think that's what the key is. I think these decision makers at the top levels, if they genuinely care about their players, and the NHL here specifically, that's the league I follow the most closely, if they care about their players and about their fans, by the way, then they need to have regulations, they need to have rules in place, and they need to also have evidence-based care and treatment models and support systems in place as well. So, Neil, as you know, they have the PAP, the Players Assistance Program, for a whole assortment of health issues. But it also needs to include, I think there needs to be a separate category, frankly, that's just addressing gambling and gambling addiction, sports betting addiction. Because you know me, Neil, I'm somebody who's a very positive person. And I'm also I'm a hockey nerd, but I'm also a science and medical nerd. And I believe in positivity and ending on a positive note and on a hopeful note. The good news is help is available. So when people need to understand and recognize what the signs and symptoms are of problematic gambling. It includes, the person who can't stop. They're constantly chasing. They're constantly preoccupied. They're gambling when they're distressed. They're lying about their gambling, lost opportunities. So if you're seeing those signs and symptoms, get help. There's medications that are available. They're not FDA approved yet, but medications are available. There's psychotherapy, including cognitive behavioral therapy or CBT. Yep. Gamblers Anonymous, 1-800-GAMBLER, intense outpatient resident programs. Anyway, help is available. That's the good news. So I just think, the genie is out of the bottle, Neil, to use your expression. But that said, there's an opportunity here to really make a difference and make sure, that if they care about their players, then they need to take action, and action is available.
Dr. Roy, where can people follow you or contact you should they be in need of help?
Yeah, thank you. I as you can tell, I hope that I love talking about health and medicine and hockey and merging the two. So yeah, people can reach me. I'm on Instagram, hashtag at Lipi Roy MD. Same with TikTok at Lipi Roy MD. I'm also on Twitter or X at Lipi Roy, LIPIROY, and follow me on YouTube, on my YouTube health show. Subscribe. I'm always posting videos, including when I'm on air on News Nation, CNN, whatnot. I write Forbes articles, and through my CITAMED company, CITAMED, SITAMED LLC.com. So happy to hear from folks.
Well, this has been, I mean, Vic, I could go on about this for another 2 hours. I find this intriguing, and we're just lucky that we could have somebody like Dr. Roy come on our show and talk about this. I mean, we get on a lot of good guests, Dr. Roy, a lot of famous people. We have a Hockey Hall of Fame edition show. We've had, you name it, from Scotty Bowman on down, who's won 14 Stanley Cups. But to have you on is an honor, and something that we hope people will listen to this and they'll get information, and that they'll get help from this. We've all known people that have addictions, and I agree with, it's not for me to agree with you. I understand what you say when you say that one can lead to the other, because I've known individuals who have alcohol, drug, and gambling addictions all rolled into one. And we all call it, in normal, yeoman way, addictive personality. But you've explained this so well to us. We're so thankful. And we hope that NHL Wraparound, because of you, will help some people out there. Somebody will get some help because of your great advice.
Oh, that means a lot. I mean, you know me, Neil. I'm a total hockey nerd and a medical nerd. And you know, Neil, better than anybody. You've been around the NHL for so long that there are a lot of health issues that affect hockey players. And again, I talked about this in my speech recently. And I love health and medicine, and I just want to get people better. But I also love hockey. So, but something like addiction is still so misunderstood and underdiagnosed and undertreated. Help is available, and we'll make it happen, Neil. Thank you for having me on your podcast. I had a great time.
Thank you for joining us.
Anytime.
It's hard to overstate the importance of the discussion that we just had with Dr. Lipi Roy in terms of not only what is happening with gambling and addiction today, but unfortunately where it's headed.
Oh, and it's not headed to a good place, but she did give us some outlines of things that we can do as a society. Now I'm speaking, and where it's headed. And if we could never get the genie back in the bottle, so to speak, in other words, if the leagues continue to allow sports betting and participate in sports betting as the leagues do, then all we can do is be on guard for those around us to look for the signs that somebody's developing a problem.
An extraordinary guest, and at some point you and I are going to do a show on head trauma, and we're going to welcome Dr. Roy back again.
For sure.
While we're on medical topics, let's hit the injury update. The St. Louis Blues that are 0-4-1 in their last 5, they are last in the Central Division, and they are expected to be without forward Jake Neighbors for the next 5 weeks with a right leg injury suffered Saturday at Detroit. Forward Robert Thomas remains day-to-day with an upper body injury suffered in that same game. He missed Monday's loss against Pittsburgh and is doubtful for Thursday's game against Vancouver. For the New Jersey Devils, they will be without Brett Pesce for a spell, suffered an upper body injury in Sunday's overtime win against Colorado, and Cody Glass is on IR with a lower body injury. Juho Lammikko was activated off IR and made his Devils debut against Colorado on Tuesday. For the Vancouver Canucks, forward Connor Garland, one of their real bright spots, not only this year, but last year and as well in a disappointing season for Vancouver, left the game against the New York Rangers Tuesday after being hit by Sam Carrick late in the first period. It was a clean hit, but of course, the way things are in the NHL now, Carrick had to answer to that hit, being engaged by Marcus Pettersson. Garland played in the second, but not in the third. And this is the kind of injury that the Canucks cannot afford.
He is certainly coming on. He's a diminutive guy. And if you remember, none other than Connor McDavid was suspended last year for cross-checking him in the head. That's how much he can get under your skin.
Garland signed an extension effective next season, and if he is lost for any stretch of time, that is going to be a severe blow to the Canucks, who also played that game against the Rangers without captain defenseman Quinn Hughes. All right, let's turn to some other news here. 2 milestones that did not occur on Tuesday. Alex Ovechkin failed in his quest for 900 in the 1-0 loss in Dallas. And John Tavares did not get his 500th goal in the Leafs' 4-3 win against Calgary. Tavares will get the first shot at his milestone Wednesday at Columbus. And Ovechkin's next opportunity is going to be Friday at home against the New York Islanders. Is it possible Ilya Sorokin could be victimized again because he gave up number 895?
Well, it's possible because David Riddick is playing tomorrow night in Carolina.
Stay tuned on that one. In the first game of the night Tuesday, between the Flyers and Penguins, Very interesting, exciting game. 2 disallowed goals in overtime. One coming as a result of an illegal substitution on a delayed penalty, which nullified goal scored by Evgeny Malkin. Tyson Forster also had a goal waved off by an offside. But you wanted to talk about that illegal substitution play, so go ahead.
Well, they were confused on the broadcast of why isn't this called too many men on the ice? And even when they went to Dave Jackson and asked him that, he said, I'm not familiar with the history of how this came in. Well, I can tell you why it's not called too many men on the ice, because the player that jumps on too early for the goalie coming off is not involved in the play. If that player jumped onto the ice and got involved in the play, like a too many men on the ice call, then it would have been the call. But you never see a too many men on the ice call if the player substitutes for another player too early and isn't involved in the play. That nobody ever whistles that down. So on this, that's why it's not called too many men on the ice. It's just called illegal substitution, because you jumped on when the goalie wasn't within 10 feet or whatever the rule is of the bench.
And the play, generally speaking, is 60 to 90 feet up at the other end of the ice, hence your point that it doesn't affect the play. There's something else interesting in this game, which ended in a 3-2 Flyers shootout victory. Neither Sidney Crosby nor Trevor Zegras, and Zegras, as we had mentioned in Short Shifts on Monday, the top shootout player in NHL history among players that have taken at least 20 attempts, they both got misconduct penalties at the end of the overtime period. Thus, they were ineligible for the shootout. However, Evgeny Malkin, who was in the penalty box at the time, was eligible for the shootout. So, question I have for you here. If a penalty carries beyond the end of the overtime period, this, of course, in regular season only, should they be eligible for the shootout?
Well, they are eligible. The only way that you're not eligible is if you have either, I think it's a fighting major, a major penalty, or a misconduct. But 2-minute penalties, you can still participate in the shootout.
Right. But my question to you is, if a penalty extends beyond the end, should they be not allowed to participate in the shootout?
Well, Vic, here's the problem. So you're coming to the end of overtime, and you purposely try to get Sidney Crosby to react to something you did, and you both go off at, with 10 seconds to go in the overtime, and now it eliminates Sidney Crosby from the Penguins being able to shoot in the shootout. That's the only thing I can see why you wouldn't allow that.
That's why we have these discussions. That's a perfect response.
Thank you.
You know how when we mention teams are doing really well and then things go in the opposite direction?
Yeah.
We ended 2 long winning streaks on Tuesday. The Devils' 8-game winning streak ended in Colorado by an 8-4 score. This was Jacob Markstrom's first game since October the 13th. And he is in for all 8 goals against. Victor Olofsson, 2 goals, 3 assists, 5 points. Cale Makar, 4 assists. Nathan McKinnon, 2 goals and an assist. So you want to play fire wagon hockey with the Avalanche? That's what happens.
Yep. And, they've got the guns to do that stuff. So it's, you can't play that way with Colorado.
But Colorado didn't escape this game without its own warts, because they had a 5-0 lead midway through the second period. And the Devils popped in 4 goals in 4 minutes and 4 seconds before the Avs were able to draw off in the end. So as much as we want to talk about the explosive power of Colorado, I had mentioned on Monday, I still see problems with the way this team defends. And that is not going to be something that is going to serve them well when we get to next spring if this isn't addressed.
No, they better address that. You're absolutely right.
The Utah Mammoths' 7-game winning streak ended 6-3 in Edmonton. Connor McDavid with 2 goals in that one. And another game I want to hit on. Carolina Hurricanes falling to the Vegas Golden Knights 6-3. Jack Eichel, 2 goals and an assist, including the game winner with 4:59 left in regulation. Eichel leads the NHL in scoring with 19 points. And, of course, Eichel was drafted right after McDavid. And you look at the magnificent numbers that McDavid has put up during the course of his career. Eichel has not come close to that, hasn't ever had a 100-point season. But he has won a Stanley Cup. Even though McDavid has been to the finals twice, Eichel has gotten the Holy Grail. And he certainly seems to be a much happier athlete when you see him on the ice than McDavid is in Edmonton.
Yeah, and he does seem to be really enjoying his time in Vegas. That is for sure, and it's coming out in his play.
I know how much you enjoy talking about contracts and the enormous money being made by NHL players today, and of course, this is something that's going to continue well into the future. Dallas Stars defenseman Thomas Harley extended with Dallas 8 years, $10.59 million. And in Utah, Logan Cooley, 8 years, $10 million a season. That also effective next season. And as we start to fast forward with the salary cap continuing to go up, keep your eye on 2028 when the big 3 M's are all projected to be UFAs unless they extend before then. Connor McDavid, Auston Matthews, Cale Makar. It is possible that if those players hit market at that time with where the salary cap is going to be, you could see players making $20 to $25 million a year.
As I told you earlier today, one word, insanity.
Then we're going to hit something more relaxed, such as relaxed attire. And this has been going on in the NHL since the start of the season, where the dress code has been eased. And as you know, we come from an era where everybody, up until really the end of last season, entered the arena in suits, sport jacket and tie, dressed up well, represented the game well. And for occasions such as the 1500th games by Ovechkin and Colorado defenseman Brent Burns, I could see that where clubs, players come in wearing T-shirts and tank tops to celebrate the accomplishment. However, there was a discussion on Rogers last week where they brought up subject of attire. Colby Armstrong hated it. And Jennifer Botterill, who I actually like on the panel, but she made the point of saying that I like it because if kids like seeing players walk into the arena in casual wear and T-shirts and stuff like that, they may be more attracted to the game. And I'm thinking, if that's what it takes to bring fans in, I don't like where the league is going.
No, that was a dumb comment to make. The players have got to dress respectfully still. And you know what? Kids aren't going to be attracted by what a player wears coming off the bus or out of his car and to the game.
A final note here, and we mentioned Jennifer Botterill, who will be going into the Hockey Hall of Fame on November 10th, but Alexander McGillney, who we've waited for years to get into the hall, he's finally going to be inducted, and he is not going to be there in person for the ceremony. And I don't know if it's because his fear of flying or if there is some other reason that he won't be attending. But this is very disappointing for a player that's waited that long.
It is. It is disappointing. I mean, it's such a huge honor. But obviously, Alexander has his own reasons.
McGillney will, however, share his acceptance speech through a video message that will be aired during the induction ceremony. That'll conclude our show for today. And we want to give a big thanks once again to Dr. Lipi Roy for joining us to talk about gambling and addiction.
Really, really one of our top guests that we've ever had. But we also want to thank our listeners for tuning in, for subscribing, for telling your friends. You can reach us individually, Neil at NHLWraparound.com, or of course my partner Vic at NHLWraparound.com. We're on all podcast platforms, including Apple Podcasts, Amazon, iHeartRadio, Spotify, and of course, YouTube.
And don't forget our revamped website, NHLWraparound.com, where our complete history of podcasts can be found, going all the way back to January of 2024. And we also have exclusive content, including New York Centric, written by Patrick Hoffman, Neil's Nuggets, and Smith's Picks. And we usually don't tip people off, but since there's only one game on Wednesday evening, would you like to tell people who you're picking?
The one game on Wednesday evening is the Toronto Maple Leafs at the Columbus Blue Jackets. Both of them played yesterday. They're both, quote unquote, coming into the game tired. So I'm going to go with the Toronto Maple Leafs on the road in Columbus, winning tonight.
There you have it. We're going to be back with you on Friday with short shifts. So until then, take care and thanks for tuning in today.
Thanks for joining us on the NHL Wraparound Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date on all the NHL action.